Hi, I'm Liz Burdock. I am CEO of the Oceantic Network. I want to start by talking about this storm that we are in the middle of, and it is a storm. These are headlines that we face every single day. And you know that old saying, when times get tough, you really find out who your real friends are? Well, I want to give a shout out to some of the real friends of offshore wind. First, I want to start with Adam Stern. So let's give Adam Stern a round of applause. I know what it's like to hold an event and how nerve-wracking it is, and he's done an incredible job. I also want to give a shout out to the Port of Long Beach, to Noelle and Suzanne, for their vision and their patience. You heard this morning that if you want to be an offshore wind, you got to play the long game, and they definitely are. I also want to give a shout out to Chairman Hochschild for his championship, or championing offshore wind every single day here in the state of California. And then to all of you for just being here, because times are tough. You see it, you read it, you know it. And running Oceantic, although we changed our name in 2023 and rebranded so that we could look at a variety of ocean technologies, offshore wind is still at the heart of what we do. And we sit in the middle of the offshore wind ecosystem. And being in the middle of that ecosystem, we really feel how challenging it is right now. And we understand what is happening, but we understand what's happening because what we do is we track the offshore wind industry, not by just looking at news reports or, essentially gathering data. We talk to people and we ask them what's happening, what's going on, and we really get the color behind the headlines. And that is why the headlines really don't tell the narrative of what is happening within the offshore wind industry. During the last year and a half, we have built 1.1 gigawatts of offshore wind power. We went from 42 to 1.1. By the end of 2027, we will have built 6 gigawatts of offshore wind. You heard Adam talk about it this morning. That's a 500% increase from where we are today. Construction is happening. We've completed 2 projects. We have 3 projects that are under construction. But the pressure is real. Make no mistake about it. This administration does want to kill this industry. And we have faced 25 different federal actions during the last 16 months. Actions that have really been focused on stopping the industry, sabotaging it instead of supporting it. So we've done what we could do to stop this, which is we went to court, and we have won our legal battles. We provided evidence and data and won. So I want to read a quote from one of the media stories that said, "What the Trump administration tried to freeze through political interference, the courts have largely refused to let die." And that is true. So installation continues, we continue to work, and more importantly, our projects continue to perform. We're now gathering real in-time data about how our projects that are connected to the grid are working during the winter. During Winter Storm Fern, this is a graph of the Vineyard Wind project, when the grid was under extreme stress, this project showed up at a 75% capacity factor. That's huge. South Fork was able to keep prices low. You'll see down in the Eastern Long Island prices, the orange dots, they're much lower than the rest of the states. That is because offshore wind has a fixed price contract. And you heard the Turn Forward report polling. Consumers are starting to understand this. They're starting to understand that offshore wind is a hedge against volatility, which is huge. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're seeing that sea change in consumer support of offshore wind. So this is why I think the market endures, even though we're facing some pretty strong headwinds. Market forces. We all know demand is not going to decrease. I don't have to go into that with you for all the reasons why. In fact, just yesterday, we saw the largest merger of utility companies in the history of the United States because of the demand of data centers. And we have three shovel-ready projects that will provide 5 gigawatts of energy just waiting to get built. These are the next 3 projects that when we have a more friendly federal administration, that will get over the finish line. So we have 3 more sitting there waiting to be built. And the 6 gigawatts I talked about that we'll finish constructing at the end of 2027, well, that turns into a $1 billion a year O&M market. So that will bring all the investment and all the jobs that for 20 to 30 years that an O&M market provides. And although we're not seeing the same investment in supply chain that we saw, in 2023 and 2024, the long-term supply chain investment is still staying intact. And I'm pleased to announce the fact that we've had 2 steel facilities in Kentucky and in Texas upgrade their steel fabrication lines to the tune of $3 billion so that they can serve the offshore wind industry. So that's not going to go away, and that's going to help lower cost. This is a headline I like for 2 reasons, and I want to take it in 2 parts. The world is embracing offshore wind. The part that I don't like is even as the US retreats. And we all know that there is a global floating offshore wind market, 250 gigawatts to come online in the UK, France, and Asia, of which California and the California supply chain can be a big part of. But here's the thing, the second part. The US is not retreating at all. This industry is not retreating. We are rethinking how we deliver offshore wind in the United States. We're using this time to look at the structural framework of the industry and the market and what wasn't working. States are now looking to take on developer adjacent roles, looking at potentially investing in pre-development work, looking at procurement reform. Those are things that states are doing to keep this industry going. And us, as an industry, we're taking a look as well. We've launched Project Second Wave. I've interviewed more than 40 companies, asking them what they think about the market, where they think in whether or not this market will rebound, and whether or not they will stay invested in the industry. They've all said yes. Then we surveyed 53 more companies. These are some of the findings that we have that have come out. One that I want to talk about specifically for California is that no single state can anchor a supply chain, not at the scale that the industry will need. So I think that's really important. As we sit here in the state of California, you must think regionally. You have to think bigger. And I think that's an important lesson to learn. This time does create an opportunity for us to do things better, to do things different, to launch Offshore Wind 2.0, which is much more innovative, and that is much more durable, and that moves faster than what we did in the last iteration. So I also want to say that this is a personal attack on us. It's not policy. And I think that that's really important because we need to recognize this as a moment in time and not what's going to happen forever. But we all know this is not going to end. We all saw the lease buybacks, and I'm not going to get into that. We know that they're being questioned by Congress. The media is looking at the deals and whether or not, everybody's discussing whether the legality of them. So that's a question for the next panel to come up. and discuss, but I want to talk about what it means for the West Coast, and specifically for those of you that are in the room from the state. I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't know, but I am going to actually be the one to, pardon the pun, point out the elephant in the room. It's not a surprise because media has reported this. You are at risk of losing more leases unless it gets challenged. And you really need to challenge this in court. And I think that's a great place for me to sort of segue into the next panel. But I want to thank you for your time. And if you want to reach out to me at all, please feel free. Questions, feedback, ideas for how we move the industry forward, I'm all ears and I'm here to help in any way I can. Thank you.